Hey, Wildland crew. We're going to do a couple of quick videos here, this one and another one that go together. Bill Ty changed the order of the book when it got bought by IFSTA. So I'm a little out of order here. In the book, Chapter 5 is about Fireline Construction. We will cover that here. And then Chapter 6 is about the use of water. We're going to kind of mix them up a little bit. I'm going to present them the way I prefer to present them. I got myself here just in the bottom so you can see me that I'm a real person. And I'm looking pretty burly today because I had to call in sick. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this video. Okay, I want to get right to it. I want to be quick through this one. Don't be intimidated by the number of slides because a lot of them are just pictures only. So I'm going to make my face go away, hopefully. Nope, I clicked on the wrong one. There we go. Okay, hopefully I disappeared. I'm not sure if I did or didn't. Quotes for the day. You know how I like to do this. Theodore Roosevelt, one of my favorite presidents, said, "Believe you can and you're halfway there." Well, there's a lot of truth to that. You got to believe. You got to believe. You got to have a vision. You got to have a dream. You got to be going somewhere. But you got to start going, though. That's part of the thing. Don't just dream about it. Go. Then President Reagan said, "There are no constraints on the human mind, no walls around the human spirit, no barriers to our progress except those we ourselves erect." These days, a lot of people want to blame everyone else for their problems except for themselves. The barriers to our progress is most of the time in our own mind and in our own making. So, you can do it. You just have to decide what you want to be, what you want to do, and pursue it with all your heart. Now, sometimes people think that just dreaming is good enough, though. Dreaming and believing. And I just don't agree with that. I agree with Louis Zamperini. And you can see Louis here. Let's see if I do that. People say all anyone needs is a positive attitude. It's nice to have, but a positive attitude has nothing to do with winning. What matters is what you do to your body. Self-esteem can't win you a race if you're not in shape. You've got to do the work. Okay, so we're going to do the work right now to help you in your dreams and desires to be a firefighter, whether it's wildland or municipality or whatever it might be. All of this is good for you to learn no matter what kind of firefighter you become. So when we start talking about what are we going to do about the fire, we've talked about assessing a fire, understanding, being aware of all of this stuff, and then noticing when fire is in alignment. Those are the things we've talked about so far, awareness and alignment. Now we're going to talk about what are we going to do about it. Well, we're going to assess it. We're going to come up with an action plan. Sorry, my phone's ringing in the background. And we're going to start to do something about it. So what are we going to do about it? Well, we're just going to go back to the basic old fire triangle. You know, the fire tetrahedron is something that a lot of scientists want us to teach nowadays, and we do teach this here at all the campuses I teach at. But the fire tetrahedron really doesn't have anything to do with wildland firefighting. It has to do with more of our interior fires and ways that we have extinguishing methods that break the chain reaction. When we're talking about a wildland fire, we want to get back to the very basics, the fire triangle. So we want to deplete it of oxygen. We want to take away the heat or diminish the heat or take away the fuel. We're going to attack one of those legs of the fire triangle. Just the basics that you learned, whether it's Fire 1 at Mount Sac or whether it's 101 at College of the Canyons or 151 at Oxnard. It's all the same thing. We teach you these very basics right in the beginning. we want to go back to just taking away a leg, or we can attack all three in wildland firefighting. So we remove the heat with water and with Class A foam. We remove the fuel by cutting a fire line. We burn out the fuel maybe, or we block the fuel with retardant or apply a gel barrier. Or we can remove the oxygen by smothering it with foam or with dirt. Dirt's not always the most reliable. It's good for temporary, but don't count on just throwing a shovel full of dirt on a hot spot that it's not going to continue to smolder under that dirt. So don't rely on that too much, but it's a great way to knock it down. A lot of hand crews, as they're moving forward, they'll take just some shovelfuls of dirt and throw it forward just to knock the fire down a little bit as they continue to move forward. Okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to do like the U.S. military does. Of course, when we assess a fire, the incident commander is going to determine the method of attack, whether it's going to be direct or indirect, whether it's going to be offensive or defensive. But as we do that, we assess our resources. And that's, in our 6 A's that I use to teach this class, that's our arsenal. We're going to look at, well, what are we going to use? What do we have? What do we need? What are we going to use? Well, with the growing number of major campaign fires, we're going to throw everything we have at it. So just as if the United States, God forbid, ever gets in another war, it's probably not going to be one of these little ones. It's going to be a big one. And we'll throw the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, watch out, here come the Marines, the Army, and yes, it's real. Star Trek is out there. Space Force is a real thing. I know people who are involved in it, and they're going to knock out satellites. They're going to be fighting from space. So in the wildland firefighting, we're going to use everything we have. Well, the number one thing that we want to use is water because it's so effective. Now, a lot of times it's hard because when we're at a wildland fire, water is not as available. But it is our most effective fire suppressing agent known to man. It cools, breaking that heat side of the fire triangle. But we have to remember our goal is a fire control line. And we should never consider a wet line as a final fire control line. It knocks the fire out, but it has to be followed up with hand crews who are going to do a control line. So water's most effective if applied as part of an overall strategy where we're going to use other crews in addition to our engine crews who are going to come in and cut that fire line, cut to mineral soil. So when we're using water, we have to remember we don't always have a hydrant right nearby when we have a house fire. So we have to use our water very economically and efficiently. So, I remember when I was being trained in this as a young firefighter, they said, hey, Randy, you got to pick up the pace, but don't go too fast. It's the same thing when I had my open heart surgery. The doctor said, now, Randy, when you go home, we want to make sure you're not just lying around. Get up and move around. We want you to take walks. We need you to move around, but don't move around too much. But make sure you do move around. Well, I'm saying, well, what do you want? How far do you want me to walk? Well, walk as much as you can, but don't do too much, and it's constantly this little balance where, the only way you figure it out is by doing it. And so the right amount of water cools the fire enough so that you don't burn your hose as you move forward. You don't want to waste your water and just oversaturate it. We're not in mop-up now. We'll do that later. We'll come back and saturate it, make sure everything is absolutely out. But right now, we're cooling it enough to where we've knocked it down. It's not going to continue. and we've cooled it enough to where we're not going to burn our hose as we move forward. So it's a learned technique of how much is enough, but not too much. And we'll talk about that a little more. So you're going to move along the fire perimeter. The best, most efficient offensive attack is 1 foot in the black, 1 foot in the green. You move right along the fire line, attacking it, spraying, maybe ahead a little bit, knock down the fire, and then move along with the lower stuff. Easier with the grass fire. As you get into the bigger fuels, you've got to be a little bit more careful, and maybe use a straight stream ahead of you to knock it down, and then move forward a little bit with a spray. We want to put the fire out. We want to always create a solid anchor point at the beginning. We don't want this fire reigniting behind us. So create a solid anchor point. A lot of times my guys, when I was an engineer, they'd take off. I'd pull off one of the reel lines, and I would just clean up everything around that anchor point and make sure it's super secure and my guys are safe. So water management, 1 volume of water will cool 300 volumes of burning fuel if you apply it properly. And notice this firefighter in the picture. He's moving forward. He's going quickly, but you don't want to go too fast. Water is limited, so use the correct nozzle stream. Well, what's the correct nozzle stream? Well, there's different kinds of nozzles, and you can see all these different pictures here. Usually these kind of nozzles are 1040s or 2060s. They don't use as much water, as many gallons per minute as your structure firefighting nozzles. They're much more lightweight. You don't want some big heavy monster. I think you can see my arrow here. These guys are used by the U.S. Forest Service. This is a straight stream, and this is a spray. And these are used by more other fire departments, 1.5 inch or inch. We'll talk about that later when we talk about tactics some more. Most nozzles have a straight to spray to fog adjustment. So straight streams for reach, but they do use too much water. So, sorry about that. Sprays should be like about a 45 degree. You want to get a little of the water in the green and a little bit in the red and black, where the fire is and where the black is, and just kind of move along, kind of moving sideways, and forward. Fogs can be used to provide protection from the heat, but we really don't want to use a wide fog unless we're protecting ourselves. Fire attack in lighter fuels. You can, in our book, the author is a big fan of pump and roll. Pump and roll is when the engine is put in PTO, power takeoff. It is able to pump and roll, right? Just like it sounds. So you don't want to be changing gears. You pick one gear and you just cruise along with the guys next to you. This is a tactic that needs to be done correctly. The engineer has to have visual on the firefighters at all times. Last thing you want to do is run over one of your firefighters. And it has to be the right kind of topography and the right kind of soil. You don't want to sink into the sand and get stuck, and now you're useless to the rest of the firefight. So in light fuels, you can work from the black. Sometimes in heavy fuels, you have to work from the green. I'm not a big fan of that. I like to be right on the edge. Move along the fire's perimeter, parallel to the fire line. Best use of nozzle angle. Sometimes they say, if you put it over your shoulder, you're going to get a bad angle. Well, pull it over your shoulder and move it forward a little bit and get it down at about waist high, not way up by your shoulder. If you get it down lower, you're going to get a better angle. And this guy here, he's got a really good stream going, and you want to maybe be a little bit wider than that, but you want a good angle. The reason why we put it over our shoulder is to help us push forward. A lot of times you might not have another person helping you move the hose forward. So it gets heavy as it drags. We're usually only using 1 inch or 1.5 inches. So depending on the situation, putting it over your shoulder helps you move forward. Use the stream to put in a water scratch line. Remember, this is just to knock it down so that the hand crews can come in and put in that more efficient control line. Now, water has one downside to it, is it's got high viscosity, a lot of surface tension, so it rolls off of a lot of the fuels that we're trying to put out. So what do? We add wetting agents, and the wetting agent most commonly used with wildland crews these days is Class A foam. It breaks down that surface tension and allows for better penetration, better spreading capabilities. I believe this is a test question, but it's definitely something you need to know. Foam makes that water a third more effective. So think of it in this sense. If you had a 300-gallon tank and you use foam, it's like you have a 400-gallon tank. Or if you have a 600-gallon tank, it makes it like it's an 800-gallon tank. So it's a third more effective. The different kinds of wetting agents, there are gels. Barricade gels are for, sticking to things, but there are other kinds of wetting agents. They call it wet water, but we're going to use Class A foam. Class A foam will produce a milky solution, and you can get this wet, foamy bubble solution that holds moisture onto unburned fuels, allowing it to penetrate and cool longer. I am missing one of the okay, here it is. Allows the water to penetrate the fuels, right? It's very effective during mop-up. We might even kick up the amount of foam concentrate to water. We never want to go over 0.1, right? 1. We want to be in between 0.1 and 1% of foam concentrate to water. More is better is not true here. If you have too much foam concentrate, it makes it less effective. So it's efficient, and Class A foam is the wetting agents here they're saying are efficient and less expensive than Class A foam. You know what? Everybody's using Class A foam, so just ignore that. So what does it do? The wetting agents and the Class A foam allow that water to get into the deeper seated fuels. A lot of times we have tons of litter and duff on the ground when we're fighting fire. We want that water and that foam solution to sink down deep into it and continue to penetrate over time. So here's the slide I was looking for. This is probably the most important slide about this foam portion. So you take foam concentrate, and pretty much every fire engine on the line these days has a foam injector already installed and part of the engineer's panel. He pushes a button, sets the amount, the percentage amount, and the foam concentrate gets injected into the water after the pump. You don't want it before the pump, after the pump. So when you add foam concentrate to the water, you get foam solution. Foam solution is a clear, milky fluid. It doesn't have a lot of bubble structure. It's mostly water. So it's good penetration. It's good in cooling down the fire. It's good for fire attack. It's good for mop-up. Now, what if we want a more frothy foam, which is going to have better sticking qualities and going to have more long-lasting qualities? It's going to penetrate over time. Well, then we have to add air. So we take our foam solution and we add air. Now, a lot of our nozzles add a little bit of air to it, so you might notice kind of a wet foam type of aspect to it with just a regular old nozzle, but that's really not what they're designed to do. So wet foam, the only way you can really get wet fluid or dry foam is by adding air. Wet foam is when it's still mostly watery, large to small bubbles, fast drain time, good for fire attack still. But once you start getting into fluid foam or like a medium foam, you're going to have more of a shaving cream, but a wet shaving cream. Medium to small bubbles, flows easily, moderate drain time, fire attack and prolonged effect is what these are good for. Fire attack depending on the situation. So I'm going to use it in certain situations. And the only way you can do this is with air aspirating nozzles. And I've got some pictures of those for you. If you want foam that's going to stick to a building, even stick to the underside of the eaves and the sides of the walls, then you need dry. And the only way you're truly going to get dry shaving cream-like super sticky Class A foam is to have compressed air. Now, the problem with compressed air foam systems is they're very expensive and they take a lot of maintenance. So I've heard that LA County Fire is phasing out not buying any new engines with CAF. They have quite a few of them, but they're not getting new ones. But I might be wrong on that. That's just a rumor I heard. They're good for structured protection. So Class A foam, when the air is mixed in there, you can get, and you see in this picture, this guy is doing a wet line with Class A foam and prepping for a firing out operation. So the layer of bubbles helps to provide a barrier to oxygen and insulates the fuels from heat. Class A foam is more effective than plain water because it penetrates, the bubbles stick, the bubbly water absorbs heat more efficiently and enhances the cooling effect. And as I said before, never more than 0.1 to 1%. Usually on a wildland fire, I would start at 0.2, maybe 0.3 as we were attacking the fire. And then later in mop-up, I might get as high as 1 if I was using an air aspirating nozzle. I'm going to skip some of this because we're going to have some presentations on foam that will get more in depth. But here's a great picture of using CAF and see how it's sticking under on everything. So really good for structure protection, but this will not last days, it will last hours. And with time, it diminishes in its effectiveness. So it's something you do before the fire gets there. But again, high quality foam starting at 0.3 and then going up from there. I just showed you a picture of a wet line. You can do a wet line by using CAF or by using one of these big nozzles I'm going to show you in a second. So conventional nozzles can be used to apply Class A foam with straight stream spray or fog settings. But if you want a fluffier medium or fluid foam or close to dry, not as good as CAF, but close to, you're going to need air aspirating nozzles that can produce foam from 0.2 to 1% solution. The ratio is going to vary depending on the type of application. And here's pictures of those nozzles. So see these holes? They entrain air into the foam solution, not as effectively as compressed air, but as you can see, these little guys, sometimes 90, 95 gallons per minute, can shoot further. The big guy is only going to do like 40, 45 gallons per minute, doesn't shoot as far, but gives you more closer to that shaving cream. So when you use these big fat guys, you can get pretty close to what a CAF would do, but not as well. Okay, a couple more slides here about water methods. Firefighting gels. Now, the gels are very thick water, and they can absorb heat they absorbs water at a ratio of at least 50-1. Very effective in protecting structures. Gels cover and protect. Gels can remain effective for up to 72 hours. So much more time to hang on that building. So a lot of, unfortunately, only the affluent are able to afford this. But in these areas that have a lot of wildland fires, people are paying for services where private companies will come in and use firefighting gels on their building in case of a fire approaching. And they pay for a service to do this. Well, one of my students in this class worked for one of these companies, and they have these smaller, they're not like big fire engines, but like a Type 6 rig, where they've got a pump and they add the gel and they spray it on the buildings, and then they move on to the next one. It's very expensive. Don't use gel if water or Class A foam is going to work. And these gels, here's the other thing about it. You have to be trained in how to use it. If you use them at the wrong proportions, it just doesn't work. So the old firefighter rule of if a little is good, a lot is better, it doesn't apply to gels. Okay, let's move on to talking about the terminology of our different kinds of lines. Okay, control line is our big basic. Describes all the constructed or naturally existing fire barriers and treated fire edges to control the fire. Okay, so that's just a broad term. Control line is a line that we're using to break the spread of the fire through the fuels. A fire line refers to any area where we've cleared strips or portions of a fire from which flammable material has been removed by scraping or digging down to mineral soil. Okay. Purpose of a fire line is we're working to create a safe strip from which to start burning out. So we might burn out and widen our control line by using fire. But if we're going to do that, we need either a wet line with the foam, or we need a fire line where we've scraped the fuel, where it's only going to go in the direction we want it to go. So we're isolating the burned area from the unburned. Goals of a fire line is just to create a gap in the flammable materials. And see here how they've used dozers on a ridge line. This is a great place to build a fire line because the fire slows down when it hits the top of the ridge. And if we've created a wide enough fire line and the wind is not pushing embers ahead, we can hopefully stop it on the ridge. Okay, so to create a gap in flammable materials which prevents the fire from continuing to spread. Fire lines can be constructed using hand tools or mechanized equipment. So different kinds of lines, right? Different kinds of fire lines and control lines. A wet line is one that's used using water or foam. It's wet. It's obvious. It can be used to extinguish the flame front or a safe strip to burn from. Unless in extremely light fuels, it's not considered a final control line until it has been cut to mineral soil. And I would even disagree with that. Let's just go ahead and put a line around it to mineral soil. It just takes some time and effort. Fire line descriptions continued. Retardant lines is one that is constructed by an air tanker or a helicopter. We often call it painting the ridge. It has to be followed up with a wet line or with a control line. But the purpose of these lines is more to slow down the fire and give us a chance to get a true wet line or control line in there. A scratch line is a hasty, narrow line cut to temporarily stop the spread of the fire. Just like our wet line should not be considered a final control line, a scratch line is not considered a final control line. A hand line is constructed using hand tools. Scratch line is also used using hand tools, but it's quick and hasty. We're bumping and running, but another crew, or we will come back and clean it up and make it a more efficient, true control line. A dozer or a cat line, it's a line that's created with a dozer or a cat. So in light fuels, graders or scrapers are used. In heavier fuels, we might have to have crews that are going ahead of us with chainsaws, and then the dozers might come in. Dozers cannot be used in national parks, in what do they call that other kind of wilderness areas where vehicles are not allowed in there. And in the national forest, you have to have permission. They do allow it, but you have to clear it with the overhead. So dozers are very, very, very effective, but they're also very destructive. So they limit their use in some parts depending on the owner of the land. National parks, National Forest Service, wilderness areas. Hot line is a line that still has fire active on it. Undercut line is a line that is constructed with a trenching on a hillside to catch rolling, burning materials. We also can call it a cup line or a trench line, where we not only scratch the surface, but we create like a ditch, a cup. And here's a better view of that. See how they've created this cup here, this trench. You take the dirt that you dig out and then you put it on the low side, which hopefully anything that rolls down will catch in that trench. Almost done here. So, more descriptions. Cold line is a fire line that's been controlled, mopped up, and considered safe. It's cold line. Done. Open line refers to any fire line that has an open fire front. Detonation line, I'd love to see this done in person, but I never have, is a line that's made by specially trained detonation crews, and they'll wrap det cord around a whole bunch of trees, and they bring down 10 trees all at once with detonation. Anchor point, we've talked about before. It's an advantageous location where we start to build our line from. So usually it's good to use natural barriers like a road or a riverbed, a bunch of rock formation, as long as it's clean. So an anchor point is used to reduce the chance of firefighters being flanked by the fire. Anchor your fire lines first, and then use natural and existing barriers as much as possible. Go around your heavy fuel concentrations. You might have to burn some little areas out. Don't forget to include your spot fires into your control lines. Wrap around them because you've just defeated the whole purpose if you don't. Keep the line as straight as possible. But, again, take advantage of, there's already a little dirt road here, and they're taking advantage of that. So locate the fire line close to the flame front. Construct lines at the base of hills when you can. Construct a line on the backside of a ridge when you can. These are all really good, advantageous places. And, of course, plan for the fire spread. You have to realize, though, that there are a lot of risks when we're out there building a fire line. So consider the safety of your personnel. If you are going to send people out to get a spot fire, make sure that they're not subject to the fire spotting below them and burning up on them. So, cost versus gain, values at risk. And remember those land use restrictions I talked about. take advantage of the terrain, take advantage of your resources, pay attention to fire behavior, always keep that A, right? Awareness. Constantly, one of my guys that I follow, John Harris, J.P. Harris, he's passed away, wonderful guy, but he used to always say, look up, look down, look all around, keep your head on a swivel, don't get so focused on the job underneath you, right in front of you, that you don't see what's going on ahead of you. How are we going to dictate the width of the fire line? Well, we got to look at the fuel, the topography, and the fire behavior. So, as a general rule, the fire line should be at least 1.5 times as wide as the predominant fuel is tall. Not always able to do that, it depends. But where extreme fire behavior is expected, we might want to make it 2 or more times the height. So, some of the factors that determine fire line width: that fuel, the slope, the topography, the weather conditions, the size of the fire, the part of the fire. So where it is. So let's look, at a few pictures. Fuel type, grass, and some brush. Well, we can have a narrower line there. That fuel height and density, we need a bigger, wider line. We've got some heavier brush and some scrub brush and scrub oak. The fuel size, if we're in heavy timber, we need bigger lines. Fuel condition, if it's drought conditions, very dry, lots of dead stuff here and there, lots of junipers in here, very flammable materials, very dense. Going to want a wider line. And our slope and our topography. Where are we on the slope? If we're mid-slope, we got to have a cup or a trench line. If we're down at the bottom, it can be a little cleaner, a little narrower. If we're up at the ridge line, we maybe want wide enough to where it's from one side to the other of the ridge. So fire line can be constructed with hand tools, mechanized equipment, water, but it's temporary, retardant, but it's temporary. But the only reliable line is one which is cut to mineral soil, constructed so it will catch rolling material, and on the fire's edge. Okay? That's very, very important. So, as a general rule, construct the line when moving uphill. If fire line must be constructed downhill, you got to do so with extreme caution and check your IRPG, and this is what it says. It says the decision has to be made by an experienced, knowledgeable firefighter after thorough scouting, after communicating with the authorities, the incident commander, or whoever is the ops chief of that area, and reliable communications have to be in place. They're essential. Don't attempt to construct the downhill line if the fire is directly below the starting point. Line should not lie in a chimney or a chute. You want to make sure you've got good communications, got a good lookout, LCES, right? Firefighters are able to quickly reach a safety zone. You're anchored at the top. Avoid undercut line if at all possible. Line firing should be done as the line is constructed if you're going to do firing. And, of course, pay attention to your 10s and your 18s. Attacking a fire from our book. Attacking a fire from above is very dangerous. Do it only as a last resort, with supervisor approval, with several ways to escape. And if that becomes necessary, if it seems too risky, say so. Say something. And our Loop and Glen Allen fire video that we watched, but there are many other fatality fires that this was what was done inappropriately, in the wrong way, and why people died. So, one last slide. Well, how to, we build a good line. Sometimes in the rough fire, in the Sequoia National Park and forest area, they called that the fire from hell. They said it kept jumping the line in the craziest, weirdest ways, literally on the rocks. There was one spot that somebody told me about where the lichen, the moss that attaches to the rocks, caught fire, fell on the other side of the line, and spread the fire. So weird stuff, right? So radiant and convective heat can ignite fuels outside the line. Convective heat can ignite spot fires and also, of course, embers and brands and stuff like that. Line not cut to mineral soil. If you haven't done an efficient job, there are times where it will go through the tree roots. That's my last one here. Fire burning along a buried tree root. Very rare, but it does happen. Burning material rolling down a slope with an improperly built undercut line or trench cup line. Gusts of winds, whirlwinds, fire whirls, burning embers. These things happen. And sometimes firefighters accidentally spread the burning embers by kicking something or moving their tool in the wrong direction. I did that once, and it was in the grass. We were able to catch it real quick, but my arm was tired, and I'd been going in the same direction, and I went the other direction one time. And, I spread the fire into the grass. So it wasn't a big deal. Caught it real quick, but make sure you're kicking everything into the black. Okay, that's it, and I'll post this right away.